Welkom terug bij Koortsdroom Café, waarin we de waanzin van de dag bespreken. En deze keer hebben we iets heel speciaals, want wij gaan een Engelse versie doen. Dan denk je van, waarom Engels? Jullie zijn toch nationalisten? Dan moet je toch in je eigen taal praten. En dat is ergens wel waar, maar als je een gast hebt uit het buitenland, ja, dan kan je niet anders dan over te gaan op Engels. Dus dat gaan we ook nu doen. Welcome to Feverdream Café. My name is Iem Al Biyati and I'm here with Frederik Jansen and Massimo Etalle. And we have a very special guest from England. He is a historian, a journalist and a filmmaker. And he's here with us. And his name is...
Tom Rowsell.
Tom Rowsell, or Survive the Jive. You may know him from one of his many videos covering certain subjects on history and religion.
For the people who don't know you, can you maybe give a brief summary of what your work is?
I'm known for my YouTube channel, Survive the Jive, which is an old channel, which covers it's a history channel mostly to do with the Indo-European peoples, but mostly focuses on Germanic peoples and pre-Christian mythology mainly. I did a master's degree in medieval history where I wrote about my dissertation was in horse sacrifices among West Germanic and North Germanic people in the late medieval times, early medieval times when they were still pagan, of course. And I looked at a lot of Old English and Old Norse literature, so Viking Age and Anglo-Saxon stuff mostly. And lots of that has a big overlap with Netherlands because both of those cultures sort of connected to this part of the world. But yeah, those films are what I'm mostly known for. But prior to that, I was as Iem said, I was a journalist before that. I used to do music and fashion journalism stuff in London. In London, yeah. I lived in London in 7 or 8 years.
How was it?
I had a good laugh there. It's a good place to be. I moved there just after my first degree. So I was like 22, 23 years old. And I stayed there until I was in my early 30s. So it was like, my 20s in London. It's fine. I was never... I mean, there's a lot of problems with it, but if you're a single man and capable, it's not really... People tried to mug me, and I fought them off, and I didn't care. I did find it exciting, really, but now I have a wife and children, I wouldn't live in London.
Less exciting life now.
I don't want my 4-year-old son getting attacked with a knife or something.
Yeah, of course, yeah. And is it also there where you started getting interested into history and in anthropology? Because you were writing about music and arts as well.
Well, yes, it was mostly in London. I've always had like an interest in sort of biology. My interest in history and anthropology kind of started around when I finished my first degree in communications and media, and then I just got into reading philosophy, and from philosophy I became really interested in the ancient world and things like that.
Do you remember what philosophy you got into?
The first book I read when I came out of uni in 2007 was Beyond Good and Evil by Nietzsche. And then from that, there's the big guy, Big Freddy. And then I realized that there was this, references to earlier philosophers I didn't have any background knowledge in. So I was like, okay, I read Schopenhauer, I read Plato, tried to, teach myself the history of philosophy. Obviously couldn't do that very easily alone. But over the years, I've, filled in the gaps in my learning from that respect. And in recent years, I've become especially interested in the later Platonist authors, Neoplatonist and Middle Platonist authors, particularly Iamblichus, the Syrian. But from Nietzsche and his references to the classical world, like Dionysus and things like that, I was like, well, I want to know more about the cult of the Bacchae and things like that. So I researched that, and then I was really into all kinds of forms of, what was the pre-Christian world like? Because I was raised Catholic, and I've been I lived in a world very shaped by like fear of hell and consciousness of God. In a Catholic school, visiting convents and monasteries and things like that. And then I just didn't like it, didn't believe in it. The Bible, I didn't believe in the Bible. So I was like, okay, just reject religion. But then I really didn't properly do it because I didn't believe in just atheist dead world, like everything's just matter and there's no moral except that which you impose on the world. But I found Nietzsche very interesting the way he talks about the implications of the death of God, because I realized then that I'd thought I'd been an atheist for years, but I realized I hadn't really extirpated the general moral framework of my Catholic upbringing. And I thought, I want to know more about a pre-Christian mindset. And from that, I was researching all kinds of cultures. And then what I realized after some time is that these religions were all not religions. They were just their understanding of the divine and of of their place in the world was not in any way separate from their general culture. They didn't have like a compartmentalized part of their culture called a religion. It was simply a part of their being that they worship those gods or had these traditions and rites associated with those gods. So I was like, well, I ought to know about my gods, the gods of the English. And from that, I started learning about that.
Wow. And may I ask, how did your parents feel about it? Because they're Catholics, I think.
Well, actually, they're not really. They sent me to this is a complicated thing. My father's family is traditionally high church Anglican. So it's like the Anglican church in England, the Protestant church, was originally not Protestant. It was called Catholic and Reformed under Henry VIII. Henry VIII wasn't a Protestant in the way Luther, or he wasn't a Lutheran or anything like that. But they just wanted... It was all about Britain having its separate power from the Catholic Church and not wanting to be beholden to Rome, which I think is a motivation for Protestantism all over Northern Europe. But in Britain, there was less of a concern with the theology, early on at least, for the break. It was just a practical political necessity. But later on, these German ideas coming into Britain, but big like Calvinism and Lutheranism were influential in Britain. And then as a result, the English church, the Church of England, has had two sort of wings to it, the low church and the high church. The high church are essentially Catholics who just consider the king as superior to the Pope. And the low church are just Protestants, basically, but they're somehow under one roof of Anglicanism. So my family was high church, and so that's probably why my father agreed for me to be raised Catholic. But my mother's part Irish, and so she maybe had some Irish connections, but she's not a practicing Catholic. And I think she was very New Agey, really. She had some neo-pagan beliefs, and maybe that was influential on me. I don't know, but she's not like pagan in the way I am. She didn't worship the gods, which is more like wishy-washy, hug a tree kind of stuff. But so they didn't have any. There was no strong family pressure for me to remain Catholic at all. Although my siblings are Roman Catholics because my stepmother is Italian. So there's a reintroduction of Catholicism into the home after my parents divorced. But there was never a pressure for it or any problem with me leaving the church.
But the church is a specific place of believing. It's more separated from daily life. In paganism, it's more integrated. Could you elaborate on this?
Yes. Okay, so Rome... having a state religion, the religion of Rome, worshipping Jupiter and all, and the role of the Pontifex Maximus was the Caesar, was the emperor, whatever. So it's the high priest is the state authority. There's no distinction. And then the introduction of these mystery cults, including from the East, including Christianity, which eventually becomes the state religion under Constantine, it caused a kind of cleavage within the Roman idea of the state, because you have then, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, and the church what is, belongs to the church. So suddenly, because Christianity is a Roman religion in a sense, but because, due to its non-Roman origins, it's had to be sort of grafted on, and then you have this idea of something other than the state that is your religion, which is not really, didn't exist in Rome before, and also probably anywhere else in Europe, because they didn't have that concept. But now that exists now, and we in Europe and all the West conceive of other non-Western religions in the same way. So people come in, we can say, oh, he is a Muslim, but he's also a citizen of this country, or he is a Hindu or whatever. But the idea of Hinduism itself, like as a coherent religious thing, is British imposed onto India, onto the various indigenous traditions within India. We just termed it all Hinduism. They didn't have that word for themselves. They didn't need it, but it's very much a consequence of these events in late antiquity that we have that idea of religion. So when we're mostly reviving pagan religions of Europe, they're being revived within this framework of a religion, which makes them necessarily anachronistic because that framework couldn't have existed at the time when they were practiced.
Do you know how it was? How it was under in the kingdom of David, under Judaism, because of course Christianity came ultimately from Judaism as an Eastern cult.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know if there was a separation between state and church or temple or whatever?
Well, I'm no expert on the ancient Middle East or on Judaism, but from my understanding, that wouldn't have been the case. I probably shouldn't say any more, but I think like kings like David and Solomon are fully integrated into the Jewish religion, as that they're part of their religion. I mean, Solomon's temple is like a part of Jewish prophecy and stuff. So I don't think that the idea of Jewish kingship was separate
with
from
the pontifex. Was the king also the highest religious authority?
Yeah. That was a problem for Jews in the Roman Empire because they would not recognize that they wouldn't participate in the Roman holy events and things because they thought it was against their religion, and that's what made the Romans not always keen on the Jews. It's quite different. They didn't like Christians because they didn't have any tradition. They liked pagans, like everything to be old. So at least they could respect for the Jews for having an old tradition, which they didn't respect Christians because they would have this novelty new thing. But they didn't like the fact that Jews refused to participate in the communal state activities, the civic identity that
they already had this separation, which Christianity then also developed in the early stages of
but that separation is not to do with like, I don't think that applies to their separation from their native kings, like, you know, in Israel, but it definitely was a separation between their idea of like the Roman state and Judaism.
So for early Christians, then it would have been already familiar.
Yeah, because the earliest Christians were Jews, so they would have already had this like hostility towards Rome as a kind of something outside, you know, the Gentiles and their traditions and not part of their religion.
Yeah. Can you explain what is paganism?
Paganism is a broad term that is used generally just refer to the polytheistic traditions that existed in Europe before Christianity, but sometimes it might be used even more broadly to refer to religions around the world like that. Sometimes to, you know, be more specific about what religion I follow, I use the term heathenism. And the term heathen and pagan are actually synonyms. They both have a kind of pejorative meaning of like a redneck country dweller, but also they refer to polytheists. But the heathen is a Germanic term used by Christians to refer to the heathens that they lived alongside in the medieval times, whereas pagan is the term that the Christians in the cities in the late Roman Empire referred to the surviving polytheists living in the Roman countryside. So
that's actually a big difference.
Well, nowadays the two terms are often used synonymously, especially, and in the English language, heathen has also become a pejorative to just mean a non-Christian. So sometimes in British Empire, we used to refer to Muslims as heathens, for example. And actually, in the old German, the Palestinian lead, they refer to the Muslims as heathen in German. So that's actually a medieval tradition.
Here it was also used for the Protestants by the Catholics.
Yeah, it's pejorative, but we're sort of trying to take it back to what it originally meant, like a dweller on the heath, and a pejorative for Germanic polytheists. There are other terms some people like. In Iceland, they have the term asatru, but that's because it's an Icelandic term. It doesn't really, not necessarily all heathens want to, because generally in different parts of Europe, like Dutch pagans would be more likely to want to use native terminology, or English would want to use Anglo-Saxon terminology, whatever. So, Theodish, sometimes people got Theodish faith or Scythianism. There's many different terms, but I think heathen's good because it's easy for people to say and they know the word. It's not too exotic. But it does have that problem there that it's been used as a pejorative for so long.
Yeah, and of course you're in a Christian and atheist Europe. There are, I'm not even sure how many active pagans there still are, if you count out all the New Age people. How are you viewed by the community where you live?
The last census in 2021 showed there was well over 100,000 people calling themselves pagans, but that would include all sorts of different people. It doesn't really make sense.
Also the New Age people.
Like your mother.
Not only New Age, but also not even within New Age is also different types of. Some person who worships the Egyptian gods, for example, might call themselves a pagan, or someone who worships the Roman gods might call themselves a pagan. So there's no way you can reasonably call them all one religion, although I do believe they have a common philosophical sort of framework that links them, which is actually an ancient belief elucidated by Sallust, who said that, he called it the true account, the true philosophy, which is that all polytheist religions share a same truth, and that only the monotheistic Abrahamic tradition departs from it by not acknowledging that other people have their own sort of path to the divine within their native traditions. So it's kind of an early proto-perennialism and I think that's true. But as for how many are within this 100,000 or more are like me, I don't know. It's not really easy to tell. But also, they didn't include heathen within that. So heathen was a separate category, and it didn't make fewer than 8,000 people wrote heathen. And some of those people who wrote pagan were heathen. So it's hard to know how many, but there's so many thousands of us. I'm the Gothi in Norse, or Gudda, or priest of the Hearth of Devon. So I perform the annual rituals at certain points of the year for congregations
and
those kind of things. So I do, for about 20 people come to each event or something like that. So not a huge amount of people, but Devon's not a very populous part of the country. But yeah, I'm well known internationally among heathens, specifically because I'm an advocate for this faith. But even within the specific niche of Germanic pagan religion, which includes, Dutch, English, Scandinavian forms of paganism, there is a cleavage of politically as well, where people who want to twist it into something that supports and reinforces the cultural norms of the day, and people who are more interested in trying to just practice it as it was meant to be practiced.
So it's more activist, like people who say, well, we have this oppressive Christian system, but back in the day we used to be heathens and everybody was gay and transgender.
Exactly, that kind of thing. They
transgender.
Yes.
Yeah, they
What?
say that
They
they
say
say kind
these
of things about the gods because they wore skirts or could transform from.
But what do they say?
Well, they claim the pre-Christian religion was more progressive.
Yeah.
Oh.
And they use it as a
And progressive meaning more
liberal.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, like they use, I think they take Loki as one of the examples of someone that's queer because he's able to transform. And
those two things, like Loki, I think actually is pretty strong argument that you would say that they didn't have the term queer or homosexuals or any of those type of words. That expression for those types of people was neith, which also included anyone. It doesn't have an exact translation today, but it encompasses any effeminate behavior in a man, or any what we would say sexual impropriety in a woman. But in men, it also encompasses things like being cowardly or not fulfilling your duties. So it could be translated, and is translated sometimes with a slur against homosexuals, because it is used in that way to insult people for being unmanly. But it also can be more generally like, if you don't fight to the death, then you can be neith, or something like that. Anyway, Loki is neith, and that's so in that sense, calling him queer is probably appropriate.
Described as that.
Well, he's punished. His ultimate he's exiled from the gods. He's of half Jotun ancestry. The Jotuns are like the anti-gods, the enemies of the gods. He's of their origin, and he also procreates in an unnatural and forbidden way by transforming into female animals with animals, and then creates these monstrous beings that are the enemies of the gods. And then ultimately he leads to the death of the son of Odin and Frigg, the boulder, and he insults the gods in shameful ways, and he does many bad things, and ultimately he has to be punished. He's chained up in hell.
Sounds like he's queer, yeah.
He's chained up in hell with poison venom dripped in his face for eternity.
So there might indeed be someone described as a homosexual.
Yeah, he does things that are homosexual. He does things that are...
You end up in a dark room.
Religion.
Of a techno club in Berlin.
This is not done in a positive...
No, there's
positive
absolutely no
description.
evidence he was ever worshipped. And he's very much like a hate figure within the mythology. Yeah. And you can see, for example, like he turns into a mare, a female horse, and has sex with a stallion. Well, the same in the sagas, you can see that this exact thing is used as a stock insult to call someone, like, you know, unmanly. Like he says, "Oh, we heard that you were riding on a mare and a stallion mounted it from behind, and no one's quite sure which one was the companion of that stallion." And then and so that's like a, you know, within the context,
insults before cars.
The insults within, Norse insults were very much about manliness, and the worst insult you could have. Being accused of being a passive homosexual is pretty much one of the worst things you could be accused of. The only thing worse would be to say that you were a passive homosexual receiver to an animal or a troll. Those things are all kind of like connected because they're like unnatural within their cultural framework. But Thor, on one occasion, wears a dress, and that's a deeply shameful thing as well. That's called neath, when you shameful when you, if you were to wear the garment of the opposite gender, it's grounds for divorce according to their law. So your wife would be free to leave you if you even wore a silk garment or something like that. But the reason he did
harsh.
it, yeah, they were extremely I think Neil Price once described them as the most homophobic culture ever, and he's also the one people use as justification, saying that they were accepting of homosexuality because people take different evidence and twist it how they want, but they definitely weren't accepting of homosexuality, But Thor only wore a dress in one myth, for specific context, to disguise himself in enter the realm. We had to wear a bridal veil, so you couldn't see his face, and then he was able to enter the hall of his enemies and retrieve his stolen weapon and then kill them all, which is what he did. So that is not transgenderism. That's espionage, or it's a military technique. It's got nothing to do with that. And some of these subversive people within heathenry would like to twist that and say, "Oh, Thor is this or whatever," but that's
but it's
actually
a phenomenon
blasphemy.
we see in everything. So they try to make like the Nordic gods, they try to make them gay. They want to say
all the historical
that some
Achilles
kings were black, that some of the componists who made music were black, or
Da Vinci would have been
Beethoven.
gay.
and some
Until they checked his DNA, but
Kaisers.
They've done that.
Some Roman emperors as well. So they try to constantly subvert.
Yeah, they have to be. If they can't say they're gay, they'll try and say they're black or anything, really. But that's an obvious technique that's used a lot. But within heathenry, it does have there is a sort of cleavage between these types of people, and obviously, I don't really have any relationship to them. I think they're mostly in America, but they're a loud and vocal minority. They don't have so much. I mean, they don't have so much. They get overrepresented by media when someone wants, like, when the mainstream media in Britain or America want to have someone who's super serious and respectable among heathens, and they don't get someone who's actually educated or someone who's well known as a priest, or they don't even choose based on the most long established hearths and groups. They choose someone who's wearing a rainbow flag or something, so they can pretend that this is the normal representation of the faith when it isn't at all.
It's also
we used to be gay, but then the Christians came, now they left and we're gay again.
And it's also, I think, in male friendships, which Frederik once had a good theory about. So, for instance, in Lord of the Rings, you have Frodo and his friend Sam, and they are, of course, very supportive of each other because they go through horrible things in the movies to achieve something great. And the left likes to take their friendship and now ship them as like a gay couple, whereas they just had a very deep, manly friendship. And I remember you once telling me a great theory on this.
Oh yeah, well, I think it goes back to what you said about pre-Christian culture being very much against this. That the value of brotherhood is very important for a warlike culture, because you have to be in packs, you have to be together, you have to. And if there is any suspicion of homosexuality, they want to dispel any suspicion of homosexuality by punishing it very harshly, because otherwise men will feel ashamed to form such bonds. And with the introduction of all this new sort of LGBT stuff, you see not only that male friendships change, but also that this warrior type culture is no longer it's no longer possible for it to exist in our time. And it's one of those things that in cultural Marxism, masculinity is, of course, is very
suspect.
Yeah,
or it's viewed ironically and like tongue-in-cheek ways. You couldn't make. At some point, it happened in the 90s. Like in the 80s, you had these action films with like muscle-bound guys with machine guns. Sometimes in the 90s, it's like they still made them, but there was a sense of like irony, and it became like self-aware.
That's true,
and then in the 21st century, it's not possible to even do that the same way anymore. Like, and even people who like, if a man, I've seen this on the internet when right-wing accounts post pictures of someone who's achieved a good physique, they'll say, "Well, you're posting a picture of a man. You must be gay." But it's fun. It's very limited idea of how men can view each other. Like the extremely over exaggerate the existence of homosexuality in the population at large. I don't think very many, in fact, are actually gay.
There was actually a census just recently in the Netherlands, and it said that 2.7 million out of our 18 million people are LGBT. And then if you look into the numbers, it's 100,000 lesbians and 200,000 gays, and all those others are they called it bi plus.
It's just young girls.
It's just
jumping on a trend. It's a trend.
Yeah. So it's everything not gay or lesbian, and then just thinking like I'm very trendy.
It's confused young people who jumping on this whole like trend of not being. They just don't want to be. They don't want to be the bottom of the progressive stack. Where if you're a heterosexual white person, then you're like you're the bottom. You're the lowest tier. So the only way to clamber up the progressive stack is to have some kind of claim to being oppressed. So you can say you're bi plus and you get one up, or
just say you're non-practicing bisexual. That's the easiest way. Yeah, of course.
Or you say my great grandpa was Indian or something like that.
You had to say you do have a girlfriend.
No.
I mean a I'm explaining what a non-practicing bisexual would be. That's saying I have a girlfriend, but maybe if I see an attractive guy, it would be a different situation. But at least you can claim to be.
But that's bi-curious, right?
It's not that they choose this own. They don't choose the label bi plus. That's not the point. The point is that they somewhat identify as one of the many flavors of LGBT that we have now, and the researchers called it bi plus or something.
Just be normal.
It's out of those 2.7 million, it's just 300,000 out of the total, of course, that really would have been in this.
It's no near as significant as it's portrayed to be in the media and in general. From like, I'm not sure about how it is in small towns in the Netherlands, but in Britain, even like very small towns where there's no like gay population, they want to have a pride march, and it's
only gay in the village.
It's more to do with there's usually the only gay in the village who wants that, but it's also more to do with it's been driven by council members who want to not appear provincial, and the absence of like a pride march is a sign of being provincial. Like they want to be like London, and London wants to be like whatever Washington DC says is normal, and Washington DC says gay is normal. So they're all pretending that this is like a really normal thing, and there are loads and loads of gay people. There really aren't that many of them.
Then only the two councillors and the mayor show up. Nobody's actually.
Or loads of heterosexuals turn up to it because they want to be seen as progressive and part of this cultural elite.
But even on the Shetland Island, where you went to look for Thule and for other artifacts and stuff about the past, you even found a store with different gay flags, and you asked the boomer couple who was visiting the place, do you know what these flags are? It was great. But nothing. I
actually don't know. I could tell that one of them was a gay flag or whatever, LGBTQ flag, but there's a whole string little flags, and I don't know what any of the rest of them were. And I thought, if I don't know, and I've lived in London, and I go on the internet and stuff, how are these like the Shetland Islands in the middle of the North Atlantic, where it's just like whales and fishing? There's nothing there. Like there's not a gay community there that's going to need this, and it's ridiculous that they've got those flags up there. It's the peak of it's like
it's a religion.
It's also not a bit like a religion, but in a way it's like the to me it's a sign of American power. So it would be like the Roman eagle at the frontier on Hadrian's Wall.
Yeah.
Well, now instead of a Roman eagle, it's a gay flag.
Yeah.
And that's like Washington, D.C. stamp, like the influence. Because the word LGBTQ is invented in New York. The flags are invented in America. The entire notion of this like expanded, not just like homosexuals and these people have sex with people the same gender as them, but like all the extended weird like gender changing things, and like the idea of intersectionality where these kind of there's like this is an identity and it's part of a wider like constellation of oppressed groups and they're all fighting the same battle. This entire like neo-Marxist sort of ideology is coming out of America, and it's enforced in its client states and colonies, and that's what I perceive my country to be, like a sort of, you know...
Colony.
Yeah, colony, basically, of America.
Vassal
Well,
state.
we feel very similar about this here in the Netherlands, of course.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting that you said the thing that you said about the toys changing in the 90s, because that was actually the time when in academia this whole new wave of cultural Marxism and gender theory and all this came up.
Intersectionality stuff.
Yeah, it started in the 90s. It came, of course, from much earlier, but then the whole new invention and reinvention of all those theories. So it's probably all these cultural trends, they always align.
They're very much manufactured and pushed and nudged through different media and media sort of events and political nudging through policy and all kinds of things to try and make it what it is. And I guess within heathenry, the heathens who try and twist everything to fit that, it's probably done subconsciously because they're the kind of people who don't like to go against the grain, and they want to be heathen, or they find something about heathenry appealing, but they're terrified that they would be perceived as being in any way against the status quo, against like, you know, the dictates of the state. So they can have these amazing mental acrobatics to try and fit this completely different worldview into the one that prevails now.
So that's our current culture being destroyed. But if you zoom out, we can also see an attack on our history. Recently, there was an article about the first Dutchman or Dutch woman, I don't remember, having brown skin. So you're an anthropologist, or
the term anthropology is used differently in Britain and America. Within America, I would be called an anthropologist because history isn't anthropology. But in Britain, we generally say historians something separate from anthropology. But yeah, this is just a technical thing. But my work is, a lot of the work I do is anthropology. Sorry to be.
But is it true that the first Dutchman had brown skin, just like Cheddar Man?
Well, the word Dutch,
or the first inhabitant of this region?
The first inhabitants of the region. No, I think the way they use Dutch like that is because they want to deceive. They did the same thing with Cheddar Man, and they said the first Briton. The Briton refers to a specific cultural group in the Iron Age prior to the Roman invasion. This is not. We're talking about the Mesolithic. It's got nothing to do with the Iron Age. Same here with the Dutch. The word Dutch or Deutsch means Germanic words means the people. They're using the term that you now use for the ethnic group which exists today deliberately to try and distort it and pretend that this is the same ethnic group. It's not. This is Mesolithic hunter-gatherers in Western Europe. Cheddar Man is one of them. Lebanya Man in Spain. The oldest example of this sort of general genetic constellation was in Italy, a Villabrunner man.
But what year is this? What age is this?
Mesolithic.
Yes,
So these people lived. The Ice Age. They descend from an Ice Age population that lived around the Balkans, Southeast Europe, called the Epigravetians. At the end of the last glacial maximum, as things got warmer in Europe,
12,000 years ago.
Yeah, 14,000 years ago onwards, 12,000 years ago. So, like, things got warmer and people could move further north, and the hunting was good around the swampy areas like this. And also, Doggerland still existed at that time, so Holland was connected to Britain.
I missed Doggerland.
Yeah, we missed
so much.
It was. I think Doggerland would look a lot like the Netherlands. It's quite lowland, a lot of ducks and a lot of waterfowl to hunt and things like that. So it would be a good place for a hunter-gatherer. These people lived a lot near coastlines, and they when they moved into Western Europe and replace the other people in Western Europe, and they are known. This genetic group is known as Western hunter-gatherers, as in Western European hunter-gatherers.
So first we had the Mesolithic.
This is Mesolithic people I'm talking about.
And they replaced already a different group. They already replaced a different group.
Yeah, there was, in Western Europe, there was another group in the Ice Age called the Magdalenians, and they didn't, and whereas in Eastern Europe was the Epigravetians, and the Epigravetians kind of replaced the Magdalenians, and became this Mesolithic group called Western hunter-gatherers.
Are there still traces of them in our DNA, or
Western hunter-gatherers?
Did we wipe them out? No, the
Magdalenians. I don't think there's any Magdalenians. No, they didn't leave any significant genetics in anywhere. So the first people around here would be after the ice sheets melt. There might have been people hunting on the ice that we don't know about, but what they're saying is the first people around here properly are the Western hunter-gatherers, although actually that's not true. There probably were people here before, but the first people who contribute significantly to like modern European genome will be them. Okay. And they're European. They generally cluster with Europeans a bit. They're distinct from modern Europeans because we've changed a lot since then. We've mixed with other people, but they were definitely European. Closest living relatives are modern Estonians.
So white faces and a bit of pig's nose.
Yeah, it's thought that you can see from the skulls they all had wide faces like that you associate with Finnish people now. Yes. High cheekbones, short chins, so short, yes. Quite a square jaw. So that distinct shape, you sometimes see it in Northern Europeans now.
Borrby phenotype.
I'm not sure. I can't remember what the Borrby the older phenotype distinct groups that you're referring to. Can't remember which they look like. But anyway, yeah, you can. It's like sort of square head is what people used to use as a racist way of referring to Scandinavians as square heads. But
blockheads.
Yeah, blockheads. Is that the same thing? It's more. That's like just means stupid people. I think.
I thought that you used it.
But they were the genetics of them show that they lacked the alleles in modern Europeans associated with lighter skin, and we have been undergoing a process of getting gradually lighter for the last 4,000 years. So certainly they would have been. It's quite likely they had darker skin than us, but they had. They also had brown hair, curly, long hair. Well, not long. I mean, they had brown hair, like straight hair, is what I'm trying to say. Not African at all, and blue eyes. So if you saw someone, with this Scandinavian facial structure, bright blue eyes, and brown hair, no matter how dark their skin was, which is not really possible to tell for sure because you can only have like prediction range, it wouldn't look like a black man at all. It would look like an Estonian guy who spent too long in the tanning studio, probably. Like that is basically what you should imagine they look like. But it's not that they're lying about the complexion; it's that they're being dishonest about it and using the fact that it's quite possible they had dark skin to try and portray them as equivalent or somehow related even to modern day immigrant populations who have dark skin, which they are not at all related to.
Okay, so their story is we used to be Africans, and then the white people came, and now finally the Africans are coming back, and we were just white people with more temporary face,
which is a complete lie.
It's complete lie. Absurd.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, it's not true at all. They know full well it's not true, but they sometimes they don't. For example, a racial activist called Afua Hirsch in the UK, a black racial activist, when I kicked off about this first off in 2018, she got an article in National Geographic where she described Cheddar Man as an African. And no one in the scientific community spoke up and said, oh, you misunderstood. We weren't saying he was African. We're just saying he might have had dark skin. None of them did. But when I made a post on Twitter at the time saying, he wasn't African, he didn't have any relation to African, some top scientists, some like BBC correspondents were like arguing. They're coming to me on Twitter to argue with me, but they don't care about what's published in National Geographic, and they know full well he had no African ancestry. He wasn't African. So they're very much, they're happy to allow black people. Oh, here's the really good one. The Cheddar Man reconstruction was advised by a scientist called Tom Booth, who works with the Natural History Museum. And I tried to expose the fact that before that in 2017, he'd done worked on a paper with my former university, UCL, where he complains about racists and right-wing people and Brexit and things like this, and how geneticists have a duty to try and prevent people from identifying with ancestral populations because that feeds into nationalist narratives. And I was like, okay, he's said this, it's pretty obvious what his motivations are. But then recently, after all this time of him encouraging black people in UK to believe Cheddar Man was like them somehow and like part of like racially like them or genetically related to them, even though he knows perfectly well that Cheddar Man has no relation to them. He'd made a tweet saying something along the lines, I have to paraphrase, like, now that black people have identified with Cheddar Man is politically black because he's part of their cultural frameworks. Like, you just lied to make them think that, and then you say because they believe the lie, therefore now it has to be true because it's part of their cultural experience of being British and black. So it's completely unscientific, very I can't think, it's so dishonest. It's just not, and I don't think people realize how blazing they are about it, how immoral the way they do things.
But that doesn't matter because it's against whites.
Yeah, but the Tom Booth is a white guy. It's like, why is he so keen to...
Because he hates himself, and it's also that flows out of the cultural Marxist stuff that came up after the Second World War and was produced
Sure, but it's also about, I'm thinking of something else, because of when Christianity replaced paganism in the Roman Empire, they projected backwards into the past that, for example, Plato was actually Christian, and that sort of thing, sort of like a city of God. It's all about this. And this is also a way of conforming and saying, no, we've always been whatever we are now. Yeah, yeah, exactly. That too. No, but we've always been LGBT. We've always been anti-racist. We've always been
towards immigrants. We've always had them.
Yeah, so they want to project the values of today, which they want to conform to.
Yeah.
They want to
make the modern religion less modern and pretend it's ancient. Or
they're portraying every revolution as a return to normalcy.
Yeah.
Well,
they're trying
they're destroying normalcy with every revolution they have.
Yes.
I still feel it's more, of course, aimed towards white, hetero.
But you get away with it if you lie about whites.
Yeah, but why?
I wouldn't.
Well, then we go into cultural Marxism deeply, and maybe.
But you can just touch a bit on this because you know a lot about the Frankfurter Schule and cultural Marxism. Maybe just.
Well, they want to deconstruct what they now call whiteness, but what they used to call something else. But they want to deconstruct the authoritarian personality, and they think that that the authoritarian personality leads to fascism and oppression and all that sort of stuff. And they have all these components of the authoritarian personality that they each want to deconstruct.
They also ascribe those components to any communist regime. That like they say the Soviets suffered from RWA as well, right-wing authoritarians. So if a communist does anything wrong, then it's because he was a right-wing authoritarian. And so the communism can never do anything wrong because they just always retroactively apply this like false pathologization of any opposing view. Like, oh, if you have an opposing view to me, that's pathology. You're sick. That's why you disagree with me. Your beliefs are caused by mental sickness. And also, if anyone on my side makes a mistake, that's because he's sick as well. It's like I don't fall for such a ridiculous premise. I can't believe that.
And if I make a mistake, the sickness still has not left my body. That's why I have to sit back and listen and learn.
No, that's true. Yeah, in the Soviet Union, it was typical, of course, to call anyone, or in Eastern Germany, anyone completely. And also, so in the Frankfurter Schule, in the dialectics of the Enlightenment.
Explain briefly what the Frankfurter Schule is for people who are listening or watching and don't know.
Yeah, so this is a sociological school that came up. They came out of Frankfurt, Germany, and they are neo-Marxists, and they reinvented Marxism on the more cultural side, which was already existed in traditional Marxism, but they reinvented that, and out of this came all of this new LGBT stuff. Ultimately, it's a very brief summary, but it's very relevant because in their works, for example, in the Dialectics of the Enlightenment, which is a very foundational book, they speak of this pathology. They see anti-Semitism, fascism as a pathology, so as a mental sickness.
Is that Adorno, that book?
Yeah. Adorno and Horkheimer. Yeah. And Adorno, of course, does the study the authoritarian personality at the end of the 40s, and so he delves into this psychology, and he views it as a sickness and that can be cured on an individual level, and then they construct a sort of societal plan for how to prevent it on a societal level. And it all comes back to education. It comes back to how people raise kids. Brainwashing, yes.
Yeah, we want your children. We want to brainwash them, basically.
Yeah.
That's what it comes down to.
That's what it comes down to. Yeah. So, but yeah, it's very brief. I don't want to make it into a lecture.
It's good, thank you. Just for people to understand as well.
Western hunter-gatherers, which you say is the first group who arrived in this region who has a significant contribution to our modern-day genetics. What other groups
The other group
contribute to the indigenous genetics of this region.
Well, the European genome takes on its current form over the Neolithic. First, about 8,000 years ago, some Anatolian hunter-gatherers start coming in, and they mix with the Western hunter-gatherers to make the early European farmer group.
What did they look like?
They're almost exactly the same genetically as modern-day Sardinians. So Sardinians are pretty much the exact, almost like a relic population of what Neolithic Europeans looked like everywhere. However, although they're genetically the same, that doesn't mean that they were phenotypically uniform all across the continent, because the depigmentation process would be stronger in the north of Europe, obviously, than in Sardinia, because there's a much benefit for being fair in Denmark that isn't there in Sardinia. So they wouldn't have been necessarily as dark as Sardinians are, especially as you go further north. Particularly the Neolithic culture in northern Germany and Poland, TBK, which comes globular amphora. There is evidence of blondism among them and fair skin. So that process begins already, even though they have significant amounts of ancestry from those Western hunter-gatherers as well.
Did these Western hunter-gatherers, do we know anything about their way of life, about their culture?
The Western hunter-gatherers?
The same with the Anatolians, but let's start with the Western hunter-gatherers.
Well, the Western hunter-gatherers is their populations are greater in coastal areas, and they leave behind huge shell middens, meaning they're eating a lot of shellfish. So unlike our idea of the caveman with the spears hunting mammoth and things like that, these guys weren't taking silly risks like that. They were dependent on things like
shrimp.
Well, maybe shrimp, but also like mollusks, like mussels, oysters, and also a lot of small game like rabbits, squirrels, ducks. I mean, I think they like wetlands a lot because waterfowl are actually quite easy to catch compared to some birds. Like it's a very reliable source of if you're living in a swampy area like this, then I think they would. Quite reliably be able to get ducks a lot of the time, and other kinds of waterfowl and fish as well. They ate fish too. The Neolithic farmers are responsible for the stone circles you see all over this part of the world, and the stone tombs as well, which there's some here in the Netherlands as well. So they were big on that kind of thing.
And you see them in Drenthe. You mean the Hunebedden, I think.
No, that's different. No, the stone circles like Stonehenge.
Yes, okay, but stone tombs too.
Stone tombs, yes.
Oh,
like
really?
Newgrange in Ireland. The stone tombs and megalith tradition begins in northwestern France, in Brittany, and you have these large tombs there, like Gavrini's and many other beautiful tombs there, and they spread out everywhere, like I think it's nearly 6,500 years ago they really kick off around there, and then by 5,000 years ago they're really popular in the British Isles. I imagine they're here as well around that time.
Must be them then.
I got a picture. It's called domes.
Yeah, that's a dolmen. Yeah, that's the tradition that begins in Brittany. It comes here too.
Okay.
So and then the third people who really give Northern Europe their character are the Indo-Europeans, who arrive in different material cultures, associated with different material cultures in the archaeological record, including the Yamnaya in Eastern Europe and the corded ware culture in Germany and Poland, and the Belbeker culture, which probably originates in the Netherlands or near to the Netherlands. And the Belbeker culture is the culture that introduces Indo-European languages and genetics to the British Isles and Spain. So it's and Iberia. So it's coming from here, an invasion all over Western Europe. And once they mix with the pre-existing Europeans, you have basically the exact same genetic profile that exists now, and that's about 4,500 to 5,000 years ago.
And so apart from making Belbekers, what did they do?
Belbeker people.
What were they like? Yes.
Belbeker people are.
What do they do for fun?
Well,
kill.
They had some differences from the previous inhabitants of Western Europe. Unlike them, they had metal. So they had metal weapons and metal jewelry, gold jewelry.
Bronze, gold too.
Gold, mostly just copper. And this is like the Neolithic. So they get here like 4,500 to 5,000 years ago. They're not using very much bronze, but it's like copper more, and they switch to bronze later. But gold as well, gold jewelry. They love bling. They love weapons, and they have a different burial focus, which is more gives more prominence to the individual. So those kind of tombs you showed before, these were like dynastic tombs for like elite families who ruled over local areas in the Neolithic. Whereas what you see emerging in the burial tradition of the Indo-Europeans, which is called in Russian the kurgan, what we call in English a barrow.
The mound.
A mound. It's a round mound. There are some near here, about half an hour from Amsterdam. There's the Hilversum barrows. These belong to this culture.
There's a lot of them in the Netherlands.
Yeah.
Too.
Yeah, I just mentioned those because they're the closest to where we are now. But they're about 4,000 years old. And these usually are each one is for one elite man. Sometimes a woman, or sometimes a man and his wife, or something. But sometimes it's often just one man. And then there'll be lots of barrows next to each other, and the man in each barrow is often not genetically closely related. So whereas before you're only seeing one dynastic family, what you're seeing in this new culture is that different people can have prominence and power, and maybe is no longer just about descent, but also perhaps it's something, we're speculating, perhaps it's something to do with like his prominence, his ability as a warrior, or some other benefit he has to their social hierarchy. But they were warlike. That isn't to say that the previous people were peaceful. They were violent as well, but they were warlike and expansionist, very expansionist, because they spread across they got everywhere from the Indo-Europeans starting off in Ukraine about 6,000 years ago, and the Yamnai started expanding about 5,000 years ago, and very quickly they spread everywhere from the Altai, thousands of miles east.
Altai is Kazakhs.
Yeah, no, further east. It's like north of Mongolia.
Okay. Yeah, of course.
Yeah, so it's and all the way to Spain and Ireland. So
a few thousand years.
They're very quickly expansion. And part of the reason they were able to expand so quickly is probably definitely because they had horses. So
and how quick did this happen? How fast did this happen?
Within a few hundred years.
That's incredible.
Maybe 500 years or something like that. Wow. So really thousands and thousands of miles.
It's not just a movement, but really a conquest.
There's often a genetic replacement.
Wow.
There's some mixing on the way, but it's not like every stage of the way they mix. So like there was a big mixing event in Poland with the globular amphora culture, and then from there they move further west, and then there's a second mixing event somewhere in this part of the world which makes the Belgica culture exist. I think it's a mixture of corded ware people from Germany mixing with Neolithic French people, and then somewhere around this region close to the Netherlands, somewhere around the Rhine, there's the Belgica culture emerges, and then they spread to Britain and to Iberia without really mixing much with people after that. So, and the ones who spread east to the Altai didn't mix with anyone on the way, or they went thousands of miles without mixing with anyone, just killed people presumably.
Sorry.
But or maybe they didn't. We're not really sure exactly how violent they were, because not everything survives in the record, but we can see when there's a near total replacement in the genetic record that something very significant happened. They probably carried plague and other diseases because they were in such close contact with animals that maybe the previous people weren't. The previous people did farm cows and sheep, but these guys drank them. They also had the first genes for lactose tolerance, so some of them could drink milk raw, which previously I think would be difficult, and more people would prefer to make it into butter and cheese.
Are you able to drink milk raw?
Me?
Yeah.
I'm not, because I have I spent some time in the Amazon jungle in 2008, and
what were you doing there?
I was just hanging around,
chilling,
vibing.
I went there again. I like going to. I've spent a lot of my youth going to dangerous places. Like I like to go the jungle, and I was actually the first time I was there I was doing a documentary actually on breast surgery in Venezuela, and I lived in Venezuela for 3 months.
Specific.
Well, it was my way of I was talking about the Bolivarian revolution, and I wanted to use
giving back.
It was my just making sure they were doing a good job, and just have the test and make sure that everything was above board.
It's a tough job, but someone's got to do it.
I had to interview some girls who had breast surgery, but no, it was actually a way of talking about the communist revolution there, and how, because it was the more breast surgery there than anywhere else in the world, and I thought that's weird in a third world communist revolutionary country. Why is everyone getting breast enlargements? And I wanted to use it as a way.
It was free. It was just provided by the state.
It isn't. No, because Hugo Chavez said it was the ultimate degeneration.
Oh.
He was very against it. And he's saying, can everyone stop giving their 15-year-old daughters boobs jobs?
15-year-old?
Yeah, it was a really big thing back then. I don't know if it still is, but then all my...
When was this?
2008.
What?
I went to the jungle and spent some time there, got really sick, got some parasites, probably got malaria as well, I think.
Whoa.
And then afterwards I had a lot of treatments and things like that. The Tropical Disease Centre in Tottenham Court Road, they weren't really sure what I'd picked up, but I couldn't, I don't drink wine, I can't drink fruit juice or any like too acidic things, and I can't drink milk.
Wow.
So I can't, I'm genetically...
Before it was fine.
Yeah, it's fine before. I'm genetically lactose tolerant, and my children are lactose tolerant. My siblings, I'm the only one in my family who can't. It's because of very severe medical.
Do you know Lord Miles?
I know of him. Yeah,
You're like the Lord Miles before Lord Miles.
I was doing it before it was cool.
Yeah.
Who is Lord Miles?
Lord Miles is I thought he was just he started off as like a British guy on 4chan, and he made it his mission to go to meet the Taliban.
Oh, that guy!
Yeah,
That guy. And he
went to Afghanistan during the fall of Kabul.
And he went to many other places, and
Did
he
he come
got
back?
yes, he was away for I believe a year. He was in Taliban custody, and he couldn't communicate. Like some of the Taliban guys used his Twitter to just tell the world he's fine, but everyone was like, "This guy's dead. Like he didn't make it." And then after a year, he came back and he told everything about his stay there and how nice it was. And
Did he have a Muslim wife?
No, he has not. So he's still single. So if you're watching, you're interested in Lord Miles, feel free to reach out to him. But that's very interesting. Now he's going to make it his mission to go to the Sentinel Island.
Oh no!
So for the people who don't know what Sentinel Island is, I believe it's an island under India.
I think it's near Australia.
It's in the Andamanese Islands to the east of India. Between Thailand and India, in the middle of the sea.
And it's a secluded island, and no one's ever... Yeah, few British people went there. They got killed by
people with arrows.
Black people with arrows. And they also like attacked drones and helicopters and stuff. So
have a very interesting immigration policy.
Very interesting. So that's going to be
Very
his
angry.
next mission. But yeah, that's Lord Miles. Yeah.
So he's going to die.
Well, I actually said to him, you will die.
Him?
And no, on Twitter, when he first suggested I will die, and then someone, perhaps him, reported me, and I got banned from Twitter for saying you will die to him. When you said if you go there, you'll die, because they said I was threatening Lord Miles with violence. So I don't know. I wasn't, and I don't know. I asked him. I asked him to tell me. I sent a message. Did you actually report me? And he didn't respond. So he hasn't to this day said well, he did that. But if he is, then I
usually just said you will die.
I just said what I literally said is you will be killed, because you will be killed. Yeah. Not the maybe the auto
sounds like a threat.
Maybe misunderstood. I didn't mean I would kill him. I meant that the natives will kill him, and I was sincerely warning him, saying you shouldn't do it. But it was. I wonder now whether he or an algorithm got me banned from Twitter on my old account for that innocuous comment.
Well, if you're watching,
please let Thomas know what happened. Ask your question about the Indo-Europeans.
I didn't know you could fit so many horses in a bucket.
What was your question again, Freddie?
Yes. Okay, so about these Indo-Europeans, do we actually know which gods they worshipped?
We can actually start to talk about things like that, because while the previous inhabitants we can't even guess. With these guys, because their religion is ancestral to the religion of the Romans, the religion of the Greek, the religion of the Vikings, and even the religion of Hindus, we can look at these different religions and reconstruct what's common to them as something Indo-Europeans believed in, and that's called comparative mythology. I believe there were on this table some from a famous Dutch
your books.
Some books. Jan de Vries is, I think, one of the famous names in Holland. He does often, like, for some reason, people who were Germanic philologists are people who have been important in understanding the Indo-Europeans, because they're often people who notice correspondences.
Yes.
Yeah. Jan Pruvel, is he Dutch as well? Jan Pruvel? I don't know if he's Dutch. His name sounds kind of Dutch. Jan Pruvel.
He's an anthropologist.
The key things that we can reconstruct are definitely big importance of the sun in their mythology. They had a kind of mythological narrative where the sun is pursued or like through the sky by something maybe, you know, a monster or something, and it's also conveyed by horses and chariots and things like that. We know, like, or wagons at least, because the Proto-Indo-Europeans didn't have chariots. They weren't invented until 4,000 years ago, but they had horses. They were the first to ride horses, and they had wagons. So presumably the gods had wagons, and then they upgraded to chariots. Should probably upgrade to Ferraris now or something, because it's the tradition to upgrade to the latest technology. But they had a principal deity, which is reconstructed as Deus Pater, which is cognate with Jupiter. It means sky father, and he's like the main head god, honcho god. And also we can reconstruct his sons or grandsons to twins called the
Ashwin.
The Ashwins in the Indian example.
Also with Zeus.
Zeus, yeah, Zeus Pater. Zeus is from Deus, means sky, Pater meaning father. It's also cognate as a word with Tu, or Tyr in Norse, the Norse god. I think in Dutch he would have been called Tu as well.
Tyr.
Tyr is Norse. Yeah. So I think in West Germanic is Tu. What's your name for the second day of the week?
Dinsdag.
Dien. That would be from that deity. Dien or D. Maybe. Anyway, I don't know. But anyway, his name is cognate.
It is probably written in here.
Yeah. The old Frisian language is more related to Anglo-Saxon than Norse, so it's better probably to compare to the Anglo-Saxon.
That's the same as Irmin.
No, Irmin is cognate with Norse Jormon, and might be a name for Odin. It's thought to be a name for Odin. But so there's some things we can say with definite certainty about their religion. Some we can speculate. We can see a lot about, also from the archaeology, they were really big on horse sacrifices and of horse sacrifices. Yeah, they could sometimes in a funeral context sacrifice thousands of horses.
Really?
Well, no, hundreds of horses, sorry. And that's enough for thousands of people to eat. So you can imagine they were holding huge events with loads of people. Well, probably for one, because they didn't have fridges or anything like that.
Yeah, that's
and
true.
even they didn't even have, I don't think in the Neolithic, wide access to salt. They may have done it, we just don't have evidence for it. But salt mining and trade is very important in the ancient world, because that was the only way to preserve meats. So but I don't know if they had salted meats in those. But anyway, they ate a lot of meat. They had big events, and what we can tell from that, they have some level of social organization for these funerals. And horse sacrifice remained central part of the Germanic religion 1,000 years ago, where it survived. So this is like what we know about the Germanic pagan religion as it was practiced, 1,500, 1,000 years ago in Northern Europe, has many correspondences, similarities to what was practiced by the original Indo-Europeans. They have the same round barrows to put the great men in. They have horse sacrifices. They have a culture of ritual.
Do you have any idea of how
use.
Those rituals went?
Well, we can
because I think a lot of things, a lot of people don't have any idea of what paganism would look like.
If you would say,
everyone knows.
One of the rituals, you see like people dancing in the woods and stuff. That's what I think people would think about when you say.
There's many different types of rituals. I guess you're talking about like medieval Germanic paganism now, or are you talking about the?
Yeah, or maybe even,
everyone has an image of a church. It's very clear for everyone. What if you go to a church, you go and sing and blah blah blah. But what would a ceremony look like for pagans?
Which pagans I'm asking you to?
Say 1,000 years ago, with the horse.
Or they have different. So the ones that's easiest to see in the archaeological record is funerary rituals, because that's like something that's been buried. And also we have actual written accounts of Germanic pagan funeral accounts, because there's an Arab, Ibn Fadlan, who witnessed some Vikings on the Volga having a funeral for a chief, and so much corresponds what we see there in the archaeological record. There's a boat. He's buried in the boat. There's a they cremate him, and then they erect a barrow, and there's also ritual sacrifice. Horses are sacrificed a lot in Viking context and in earlier Anglo-Saxon context as well. It's like a big thing to do that. But both horses and ships that are sometimes interred in the barrows are transportation. So it indicates probably there's a belief that they needed some kind of transportation in the next world. And there are also, yeah. So we have a pretty good idea of what the funerals are. Other things like weddings we can reconstruct from saga literature and the descriptions there of like, and also that like the Yule festival. All the festivals involve drinking. There always are like a ritual use of alcohol and sometimes drunkenness, although it wouldn't be right to characterize a culture that celebrates drunkenness, because there's specific warnings even by Odin himself saying drunkenness isn't such a good idea in his
sometimes
aphorisms called Hovamol. He says beer isn't as good as people say it is, or something like that. Sometimes people say things they don't mean to say or whatever. It's quite good advice in there. But there were times when alcohol was to be consumed, and it was, for example, for Yule, it's several day celebration, and everyone was expected to bring their own beer to last the whole thing. So several days of drinking. The Winter Fulith, which represents the start of winter festival, was Yule's like the middle of winter. We celebrated that recently, and that would have been, that was the Norse equivalent of Winter Fulith is Veternatta, the winter nights. It's 3 days, and it required drinking on some of those things. It's not a lot of what we have as
pray, or do they
prayer is accompanied by sacrifice within the heathen religion. There isn't prayer as a way to build a relationship with a deity, like, or where you alleviate your like innermost concerns to try and like a psychiatrist that some Christians do. There's none of that. It's very simple relationship. You pray at prescribed times because it's right to do so. This is a time when it's right to make offerings to the gods. Traditionally, it could be, in the old days, it could be a blood sacrifice of an animal, but it could also be, and often was, alcohol was given as an offering. So today, most heathens would just give alcohol because, partly because we don't live in agricultural context where we have like our wealth is stored in livestock anymore. So it's not really authentic for us to buy a sheep and kill it when it doesn't really.
The Muslims do.
Well, yeah, but I mean, yeah, but if you live in a farm and you want to sacrifice sheep, I don't have any issue with that. But I think that the point is, the reason that animals were given is because they lived in a society where your wealth was represented by your livestock, so giving up a portion of the value that you own to the gods. Yeah. So they also offered beer, they also offered valuables, gold and things, and buried them, or destroyed weapons and things and put them in rivers. So
how do you offer alcohol?
Well, we use in English today the Latin term libation, which means to offer up drink, and the Romans did the same thing as the Germanic people did, which is to pour out. The word God itself, the Germanic word God, comes from a word meaning to pour out. So the action of pouring out offerings, liquid offerings to the gods, is prehistoric. It's seen also even in Hinduism when they're pouring milk and things like this out. They not so big on alcohol as Europeans. We kept that, but the original, we can see from the bell beaker culture, these beakers contained mead. So this is like 4,500, 5,000 years ago. They were using mead. Mead is one of the oldest alcoholic beverages, and so they were pouring these out in religious context. Probably we can guess that from the fact that it's all in these different religions later. So that's what we do. We offer prayers with, the prayer is something that accompanies the offering. So we say something first off, you God, name the God with a traditional epithet. We compliment the God and say why that God is good, and also mention why that God is the right one to be praying for the thing I'm about to ask for. Then we ask for the thing, then you give the offering, and then you hope that that prayer is answered. So this is like it's a very simple formula. It's found in all different Indo-European religions, so it must be very prehistoric. It's very much about giving and receiving, and this is like some people would say, oh, it's transactional or something, but it's and it is to some extent, but it's also seen as like not really, it's not like pious to pretend you don't need things. So saying like you need something is the right thing to say. Like the actual Germanic prayers often use the word bjargi or help. Help means help, and bjargi essentially means help. So you're saying I need help. So that is essentially the basis of it, is admitting you need help with something and saying so, and then asking for the God to help you.
Why is alcohol or the use of alcohol and in for like ritual kind of senses, but also to drink together? Why is that an important part?
That's a good question.
Where does it come from?
Well, it seems like alcohol became really important with the Indo-Europeans.
Right now.
And traditionally in the Germanic culture, always a young lady would pour the drinks. It was always the way it was done.
Wow.
Even in Valhall, the Valkyries pour the drinks.
Really?
So, yeah.
Can't wait.
You have your own Valkyrie here.
For the people who are just
long table.
For the people who are listening and are not seeing what's happening, we have two assistants who assist us with our drinks as if it was a ritual.
Valkyries.
The Valkyries, indeed. So continue, please.
Yeah.
Thomas.
So this like drinking culture is really clear in like the written sources for the Viking Age, where they have the lady of the house has the honor of pouring the first drinks for the people, and they should have servants to do the rest of it. But and the man of the house leads the toasts and things like that. So there's like a very ritualized, formalized thing. Where you sit on the bench is like hierarchical. So the closer you are to the big man, the more important you are, and losers get to be down the end of the table or whatever. But this, as we're going further back to the Indo-Europeans, we don't have any written sources for that, but we can tell that all these. There's similar drinking cultures among the Celts and Slavs and whatever. So this is something very prehistoric. And we can see that the fact that all these cultures, the Yamnaya, the corded ware, the bell beaker, these earliest Indo-European cultures, are burying their great men with drinking vessels is significant, because that's why we call it the bell beaker culture, because we dig up their graves and he's buried with what is the equivalent of a pint glass, basically.
A baker.
Bigger. Like
of the bell beakers, a baker. Yeah.
Bell beaker.
It's almost this shape, almost. But so it's like, why would that be the case? And I think it's because the alcohol itself had this sacral quality to them. The process of transforming a liquid through brewing had probably a magical kind of context. Like even Odin in the Germanic religion steals the mead of poetry. So poetry and the inspiration of poets itself comes from a brewed substance. And wisdom as well. The gods kill the wisest man and then take his blood and mix it with their spit to brew like this mead of poetry. So it's like very there's a kind of magical process involved in it.
Artistic, actually. It's pretty artistic. They're very concerned with the arts, and they revered poets very highly and considered the skill of a poet to be of the divine origin. So you can see how alcohol would become very important for them, even though they did not appreciate drunken foolishness, and like they could recognize, as we do, that drunkenness has negative effects socially, but they also understood, as we do today, that it has very important role for forming social bonds and maintaining social bonds and social important social events, and it had this added sacral quality, which is not quite so alien to us, because many Catholics still today consider the wine to be the blood of Christ, symbolizing it. So this is quite a natural thing, I think, in some ways, for alcohol to have these. That's why I think we don't really trust people who don't drink and don't want to drink. There's always something off. Like, why?
Afraid of the gods.
Are you? What are you afraid of? Do you transform?
They want to hide something.
Maybe they want to hide something.
Lose control.
Why don't you want to be a bit looser, more creative, more like in between the earthly world and the the spiritual world? Like when you drink, sometimes it feels like that as well.
Yeah, I think even in old times they had there was a taboo about not drinking as much as the people around you, because it's seen as calculating. Maybe you're trying to stay sober so you can take advantage of someone else.
Well, I have a follow-up question about the rituals. Because here in the Netherlands we have a very famous tradition called Zwarte Piet, and obviously with Sinterklaas. I have once heard that this has heathen origins. What do you think about this?
Maybe first explain what Sinterklaas is and Zwarte Piet for people who are watching. Of course, we
obviously have listeners from all around the world. So around the 5th of December, we have Sinterklaas, which is a saint, has become a saint. This is a long, tall, white figure. He's being followed by a group of...
nowadays looking like a Catholic priest.
Now he looks like a Catholic priest. And he's being followed by a group of black men who throw around candy And children, he gives presents to children who have been good, and he takes away the children who have misbehaved, and he brings them to Spain in a bag. So that's the tradition. It's
so
our biggest folklore, I think.
Yeah, and in the Netherlands we celebrate it with people dress, white people or every kind of race. They dress up as the Zwarte Piet, the Black Piet, and they make their face.
Yes, they paint
black.
their faces black.
And that's why, of course, many immigrants in the Netherlands were angry because why are you celebrating this racist tradition? Why are you dressing up as blacks and having these stereotypes of like the golden earring and the red lips? So it got banned pretty much. It's not really allowed anymore. It's not accepted as well by the media.
Legally banned.
No, it's not legally. It's like socially banned.
So you can't post it on Facebook anymore.
Sorry.
Oh yeah, but it's because it's an American company.
Yeah, of course, but it is socially.
But normally, every like municipality or like every village and town, they would normally like the Sinterklaas would arrive on his boat, and he would bring the Black Piet with him.
Assistance.
And now it's Sinterklaas, and the Black Piets have like a few stripes of black on them because they go through the chimney
Right.
down. So it's not racist anymore.
Yeah.
But I think it stems from something that is pre-Christian.
I think that's quite plausible. There are many traditions around Europe. If you look at like each one in isolation, then people can sometimes think it's racist. But if you look across Europe and you see these different Yuletide conventions of like wearing blackface, there's pretty good evidence that they must be from a common origin that is pagan. And a good documentary in Dutch on the subject is, I think it's called Wildgras. Yeah, Wildgras. It's a good one to look up because he starts off with the traditions in the Netherlands, and then he shows how there are very similar traditions in parts of Italy, Romania, Switzerland, all over Europe, and they can't all be attributed to just a desire to depict someone as an African. I think what happened in the Netherlands is that this even older than Father Christmas and Saint Nicholas or whatever. We call Father Christmas like Père Noël in France. You have Santa Claus and Sinterklaas. They actually were originally separate figures. Father Christmas was an embodiment of the Christmas festival, whereas Sinterklaas is Saint Nicholas. But they all got mixed up, especially in America, into one figure. But I think he would be accompanied by, as in the Alps, you have these parades of like Krampus and these different ghoulish figures, and they added Santa Claus to those, for example, as part of that parade. Now, he wouldn't originally have been a character. Sometimes Frau Holle is involved in Germany. Frau Holle is widely understood to be descended from a pagan goddess, perhaps Frigg, the wife of Odin. And these monsters represent somehow the spirits of the ancestors, because Yule was a time of the ancestors. And one of the ways that people could embody their ancestors with black face paint. And we have the same thing in Britain with people doing dances and wearing black face paint. And it was in Britain attributed to coal miners, and they said, oh, it's just because they used to work in the coal mines. Or other people said, no, it was a disguise so they wouldn't be arrested for not working on Christmas or something like that. These explanations are not entirely convincing, especially when you can see them in other places where there are no coal mining, there's no coal mines and things like that. So I think what's happened in here at the time they associated Spain, during the time they associated Spain with the slave trade and with the presence of sub-Saharan Africans, slaves, and so for some reason they thought of Sinterklaas as coming from Spain and not from Turkey, because the real Saint Nicholas lived in Demre in southwestern Anatolia. But anyway, so as a result they were like, well, that must be his black slave, and then they transformed Zwarte Piet into an actual black person, and then these attributes associating with Spanish Moors or whatever were added. But the original thing...
Yeah, so now he wears big red lipstick and golden chains.
But it wasn't before.
It wouldn't have been before.
No, I think the suit that he wears.
This is like, there was like, I think that's a 16th century Spanish clothing, isn't it? Yeah, so that's probably when the tradition dates to. Like before then, I'm sure people had blackface on and they didn't have any association with Africans when they did it. They didn't think it was African, but similarly in England, there's some of these parades where people used to wear blackface, and then later on, because of the popularity of black and white minstrel show in America, they started to dress up as black and white minstrels in the same parade. But it wasn't originally.
What's a minstrel?
It's like the same kind of thing where you wear, like in America, where white people would wear blackface and pretend to be black people.
Yeah.
It's considered offensive now.
They call that blackface.
Blackface.
That's
yeah,
why
that's something different.
The activists here use this term now.
But it's not. But the Zwarte
From
Piet
America,
is not
of course.
blackface. That's. I think there's.
But Zwarte Piet is originally as I understand, not an imitation of a black person.
No, yeah.
But it became one.
Yes. Aren't there also in Persian history? Is there not still an
in Iran,
Iranian
there's part
festival where they have blackface?
Yeah, there's an Iranian
Nowruz or whatever, the New Year's festival. Maybe I can't remember how it's called. But
the Dutch Sinterklaas, that's just Odin with the wild hunt, right? That's why the children disappear and stuff when you've been bad. It's just like
it does seem that likely that that Sinterklaas has fulfilled a role that was previously fulfilled by Odin, or had at least associations with Odin, and some of the. It's quite hard to, because some of the people who compare Father Christmas or Santa Claus with Odin make outrageous claims about the two being related that are not true, like the reindeer having something to do with Odin. They don't. The reindeer were invented in New York in the 19th century. Most of the whole attributes of Father Christmas or Santa Claus were invented very recently and don't have anything to do with Odin. But the Yule festival, one of the names for Odin is Yule Father, and the Yule festival was associated with the dead and with ancestors, and we know from Tacitus that some of the Germanic tribes used to black up to look like to terrify their enemies, he says. But from looking at Germanic language, and particularly Norse, saying the black skin is associated with the dead, so they say. Oh, the corpse was black like hell, and the goddess of hell has half black skin, and they describe a corpse as black. So their terms of color are a bit different from us. Like the actual word for black is blå, which means blue. So it's confusing, but they're basically saying if they wanted to look like a dead person, they would probably put soot or ash on themselves, and that would then make them represent a dead person. And this tradition of the Einherjar, which are the chosen warriors of Odin, like the dead warriors who dwell with him, could be represented in Yule by these parades. It's what folklorists and historians sometimes think is that there was this Yule parade of Odinic warriors, and gradually over time it ceased to be warriors and just became local people marching and then wearing the black face to represent that they're dead people, and then over time it just changes and becomes something completely different. But it's quite likely, since we know for a fact that they had this tradition of blacking up, and that we know that they had this belief, then Yule is the god of Yule is Odin, and Yule is often parts of Northern Europe they still call Christmas Yule. So it's not really too hard to see how this would develop, and that documentary tries to look at how that might have happened.
Now we're talking about you. Let's get on with that subject, because our youth organization, we like to celebrate Christmas and wish people a nice Christmas, but we also like to be a bit different than other people. So we also say Happy Yule, which is not a normal thing to do in the Netherlands. Mm-hmm. Like in Sweden, they say Good Yule, which means have a nice Yule, but in the Netherlands we just call it Christmas, not Yule. So we did it a few times. People got angry because there's a negative association with Yule.
Really?
Yeah,
they associate it with National Socialism.
Yeah, because they celebrated it once or something. Who cares about it anyway? So maybe would you explain what Yule is, and maybe also tell us about the similarities in maybe the Christian Christmas and the Norse Yule, or how do you view that?
Well, the terms in English, the term Yule didn't stop being used. We use them. We usually say Christmas, but we also say Yuletide to refer to Christmas time. We wouldn't say Christmas tide. You say always Yuletide.
Why tide?
Tide means time in Old Germanic, like tid.
Yeah.
Not because of the sea.
No, that comes from the fact that there's a timing as well, the time to the sea. So it's the same. The same etymological root. But
I thought because Christmas was coming up.
Christmas, sorry, got the island.
What's coming home?
Sorry. Yeah, so the Christmas festival was deliberately overlaid on Yule. Yule was originally calculated by the moon, so it wasn't exactly in the same place as Christmas is now. But
Because Yule takes a longer time.
yeah, Yule is actually 2 months.
Yeah, 2 months.
Two whole
Oh,
months long.
When does it start again?
2 months of drinking.
But it's roughly equivalent to the main drinking festival for the Norse was only on the second full moon of the full moon of the second month. That's when the big festival was, and that would probably be like 3 days of drinking or something like that. Or it does say until the ale runs out as the official, so it could go on for longer if they had enough.
Plenty.
Yeah.
Now we have to work because of the Industrial Revolution and stuff, so we have no time for 2 months of celebrations anymore.
Oh, we have the TED post now. But yeah, like it got fixed onto a Gregorian calendar date, which is already established in Rome because of its closeness to Saturnalia, which is around that time. So they wanted to replace Saturnalia. Conveniently for them, when they converted the Germanic people, they were able to sort of overlay the existing date of Christmas to sort of merge with Yule. And as in some ways it has some similarities to how we celebrate Christmas, but I mean, even more so in the 1500s in England, for example, Christmas was still really an adult celebration of drunkenness. It was really, really raucous. And when the Protestants come to power, like the Reformation, they banned Christmas because they thought Christmas wasn't Christian. So it's seen as...
Was it called Christmas?
Yeah, it was called Christmas, but they banned it because it was like, it wasn't about going to mass. It was about getting really drunk and rowdy and doing all kinds of funny things. Like we used to elect a fool, a lord of misrule. So the stupidest idiot in the village would become the king, and everyone has to do what he says.
Sounds very funny.
Massimo's king for a day. Then.
Actually, in the south of the Netherlands, we have Carnival, and we have Koning Carnival.
Prins Carnival.
Prince Carnival.
Prince
Sorry.
Carnival. Yeah.
Quite
That's
de-integrated.
true, indeed.
And he is indeed the biggest fool of the city, and he's a lot of misrule. No, but
Yeah,
Not
I think
anymore.
there is a similarity. Yes.
clear similarity.
It's an honorary position.
It's an honorary position.
This tradition actually comes not from the Germanic Yule, but from Saturnalia. So the Roman pagans had that at Saturnalia, where they would have like slaves would be in charge of their masters for a day and stuff like that. So it survived even in Holland and England until recently. Like the real like wholesome Christmas as a children's event is kind of invented in Victorian England and Germany. England's copying Germany a lot because we had a German royal family, and they were bringing things like Christmas trees from Germany. And then Dickens tries to like invent this whole like wholesome, let's be Christian and moral. Like it wasn't like that before, but it wasn't Yule either. So Yule wasn't just about drunkenness. Yule was about it involved a sacrifice to Odin of a horse. And this sacrifice of the horse was, this horse represents the sun, and it's killed by the king. It's meant to be the king who kills it as a sort of symbolic power of the king, like, and showing like the end of the annual cycles and like his power over the sun.
Each village would have a king.
Yeah, well, I guess that's the problem, because we only have like the account of the king visiting a Christian king, Håkon the Good, and they have the horse sacrifice, and they're like, you will have some horse, and he's like, I'm not going to eat the sacrificial horse because I'm a Christian. And they kick off because they're like, this is outrageous. You can't, the king not going to eat the horse sacrifice. So what they do after they sacrifice a horse is everyone eats it. They have a big feast, and they're all drinking and enjoying some horse stew. But they had the king in this saga. The king causes a big problem, and there's a big fight about it because he's Christian. He actually made laws saying in the end that everyone has to celebrate Yule or Christmas at this time, and he tried to like merge the two things together to try and create conflicts or whatever. But besides that, there's also a pig sacrifice, and that is for the god Frey, and the pig is used, it has to be a male pig, and you swear on very holy oaths.
Beer.
Beer.
Boar.
Yeah, boar. A male pig.
Yeah.
A male pig.
Yes, in the Netherlands we call a male pig a beer.
Beer. Oh, yeah.
Oh.
So this sacrifice involved using the pig's bristles. You would swear oaths on them, and the oaths sworn there are extremely sacred and extremely shameful for you not to fulfill. So once everyone starts getting drunk and pushing each other to say what they're going to achieve in the next
year,
they swear on the pig, and then they sacrifice that and eat that too. So it's like the sacrifices one thing to understand about animal sacrifices, they're eaten. They're not just like thrown away afterwards. It's like a barbecue party or something. But the parts of the animal are given to the gods, and like the skin and the bones. But the meat is everyone has a good feast on that. And so in some ways we can see, that's not so dissimilar, because many parts of Europe traditionally ate pork at Christmas, like in Sweden still the yule skinka, the yule ham, but Americans also like to have a ham at Christmas. We used to always have a ham, but we replace it in England with a bird, like a goose or a turkey or something like that. I don't know what is the traditional dish for Christmas here.
Gourmetten.
We can go into this. This is going to be a deep dive into Dutch culture.
What's the most common meat?
Rollade. So it's I think could be. Oh, beenham. People love beenham. It's like a ham.
It's a piece of
I think normal Dutch people do gourmetten.
Yeah, gourmetten. That's
like
the
a
thing.
small barbecue inside. It
sounds fun, but it's not as fun as it sounds, because it takes a long time. So you eat all of the salad, and then you're full
annoying.
anyway.
And everything stinks. So no one should do that.
But my point is that some things stayed the same. We still have a feast. We still have drinking. So some things are like identifiable with Christmas that were in Yule, but the offering of the animal to the gods, that's gone, obviously.
But what do you celebrate at Yule? Because you of course have like midwinter, you have the wild hunt that's coming. You talked about the Green Night with I think your podcast
that's
was
Christian.
with...
the Green Night's a Christian morality tale.
I saw the video years ago with the Golden One.
Yeah.
But I just don't remember it very good. But you also wrote, of course, a book about the spirit of Yule.
Yeah, children's comic. About the spirit.
But what do you celebrate? Because there's a lot of celebration, but what is there to celebrate?
So the two things here, I think, like Yule is in the context of the royal sacrifice. Like there's three toasts that are made. The first is to Odin, so he's like the main Yule father. So it's very much a festival of Odin, who leads the dead. He's a god of the noble dead and warrior dead and things. So they're important as well. But the king is really important. So Yule is traditionally a sacrifice for the king. It's one that the king participates in, and he is one. You make a toast for the god Njord, and you make a toast for the god Odin, and you have a sacrifice for Frey on one point or another for this pig. But you also have a toast for the king. So it's the tradition of monarchy in Northern Europe comes from ancient Germanic paganism. So it's a line going back to it. So for us, it's very important to celebrate the king, and to remember the dead, remember the noble dead, and to remember the god Odin. That's what's being celebrated. Mostly monarchy, Odin, and the dead.
But not very much the seasons.
This is a mistake. Like neo-pagans, a lot of neo-pagans think, we worship the sun, or we worship the trees growing or something. That's not true at all. Actually, it's a misunderstanding from like a 19th century view of what pagans were, as like a kind of, skipping around in nature and worshipping them. But it coincides with like this season.
Fire? Is that also like neo?
All sacrifices involved a fire. So there's always a fire present during a holy rite. Because fire, like in many Indo-European cultures, fire is like Hindus will always light a flame for their prayers. It's the same concept. There has to be a fire present for the ritual, and always would be a fire burning in a hall anyway in the cold countries. So in Yule we would need a fire, don't you?
Yeah, of course.
So there has to be a fire.
Or New Year's Eve, we still make a lot of giant pyres.
That's true. Yeah, I think that's.
They are being forbidden.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's very.
Because it's dangerous. They had like a fire shower over Duindorf.
Over the Hague, yes.
Yeah, it was very incredible. It was very impressive. There was like a fire tornado. And
you're not allowed to do that anymore.
Because same with health and safety in UK, they try to stop it all.
And it's also bad for like climate and whatever, because you're burning stuff and whatever.
Oh, what rubbish.
Nobody even died.
It was raining fire.
It was
raining fire, yeah, but there was this massive pile of pellets, and they lit it
18 meters high?
Yeah, something like that. Massive pile of pellets on the beach, and they lit it on fire. But there was the wind was land inwards, so the ash and the burning woods rained down on the Hague.
But to point out what you're saying about the seasons are important. It is a winter festival, and as I said, the course represents the sun. This isn't stated openly in that Yule contexts, but I have interpreted that way because in all the other Indo-European, within Norse mythology, the horse pulls the sun. The sun is pulled by a horse. Bronze Age iconography from Scandinavia shows the horse being pulled by a sun on the Trondholm chariot. And in contemporary Bronze Age Indian religion, and we know it comes from the same Indo-European root, we have texts openly saying the horse is the sun. The sacrificial horse is the sun. So it's pretty clear that had this solar significance. And I did a big video about like horse sacrifices in Indo-European religions, and there's constantly this connection of, one, the horse is the sun, and two, the king has to demonstrate his power by sacrificing the horse in front of everyone. And I think that the Yule horse sacrifice in Germanic context, which we know so much required the king to be present and required a toast to him, I think that was because the horse then represents the sun dying for the winter. So there is a consciousness of the seasons.
And for the sun to be reborn.
Yeah, he's going to be reborn. But the most important thing to demonstrate here is that the king is in control. He's got the power to bring prosperity and health to the people.
Interesting.
Yeah, we have to talk about our own ancestry. So, before we say anything about our ancestry, Thomas, would you like to start with Massimo to guess his
this is like a
ancestry?
game.
Well, I have the clue of the name, that he has some Italian ancestry, right? But I would guess he is not entirely Italian.
Okay, what would you guess?
I would say he's half Italian, half Northwest European.
Yeah, it's true.
Oh, there you go.
Wow. It's great.
Okay.
One for one.
Maybe Massimo, will you tell us a bit about your ancestry before we move on to Frederick?
My father is Northern Italian, is from Milan, and my mother is from the south of the Netherlands.
Yeah, I would have guessed. I was going to say half Lombardy, but I should. I didn't want to be too
correct.
I would have been more correct if I'd said it, but now I've said it after. Too late. But,
thank you, Massimo. Frederick, what do you think about Frederick?
So difficult.
Dutch.
Are you 100% Dutch, Frederick?
Yes, Dutch.
And can you, did you ever look into like what parts? Because you seem very Saxony to me.
Saxony.
Saxon-ish.
Yeah, well, that's true. Of course, I'm from the east of the country.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of Saxons.
Yeah, German order. Mm.
Yeah, and then but I have a lot of relatives from Groningen, so from the north of the country. So there's sort of the Frisians.
Saxo-Frisian.
Yeah.
You're almost an Englishman then.
Yeah. So one of the DNA tests I did said for a while, it was 23andMe, said it was 25% British, but
it was wrong. Yeah, it's wrong.
And they've corrected it now.
They say often that I'm like 50% German or Dutch or something. I'm not German or Dutch, but they just mix up the English, Dutch and German because it's all the same.
Yeah.
There's a big chunk of our DNA that's the same. The big chunk that isn't, because we've got some Welsh DNA too. But
yeah, but you both did a DNA test once.
I did two of them, or three
23andMe.
Yeah, and also did my heritage.
Did you guys also like ask them to
we matched on my heritage, I think.
So did you guys ask them to delete your like DNA stuff?
No.
Yes, I did. I said it to no sharing, deleted, and all the precautions in place.
I
want them to make a bioweapon specifically for my DNA.
Maybe clone you in the future, maybe. Okay, and now me, Thomas.
Well, I can tell from your name as well. I got a clue that there's something from the Middle East. So I'm going to guess Lebanese, maybe.
I'm 100% Kurdish. Mesopotamian. But of course my last name is Arabic because Kurdish names were not allowed to have.
I was in Turkey and I knew a Kurd there and he had an Arabic name and I was like, why do you have an Arab name if you're a Kurd? But yeah, I guess that must be why.
We don't like the Arabic part of the names because our histories, just like the white Europeans, is being erased by Arabs and Muslims. So that's why maybe this one immigrant is here at this like racist anti-immigrant party. Mm-hmm. It's because I feel the same pain that I think white Europeans feel when they are.
You're like the Frisians from the Middle East.
yeah.
And now you, Thomas.
Frieses.
I'm mostly English, a little bit of Irish, a little bit of Scottish. Varies. Different tests vary on what that's how much of that, but I'm probably 10 to 20% Scottish and Irish, and the rest is English. No Welsh.
Okay, I don't want to seem rude, but honestly, you look very good for a Brit. That's not something we're used to, I think.
I appreciate the compliment, but yeah, I think that actually there's a lot of people a lot better looking than I am in Britain. But
who?
Just like a lot of normal people. Like I go in any pub and there's
Henry
Prince
Cavill
Harry.
looks
David
nice.
Beckham.
Henry Cavill's good looking.
he
Yeah,
looks
David
good,
Beckham's good looking. If you go, I think part of the problem is that we have a thing of like having ugly people on television, which does we like
Ex on the beach.
It's like
Love Island.
Oh, Love
We like
Island.
Yeah, Love Island.
You also sent them to the Netherlands because when I was just in a train
They're
station.
not sending their best.
I was just sending, they're not sending their best. I was just in a train station. You just couldn't pick them out. The typical Dianas with the Turkish teeth and or the terrible teeth, and the women with the leggings on.
You're offending his people right now, Massimo. Come on.
I have to.
You can't do this.
There are some dysgenic features among like the general populace in Britain. I think partly that's because we're the first industrialized nation, so the effects of industrialization have made them have had their effects for longer on us. They do have dysgenic effects because when there's no environmental pressure, like generally environmental, like for example, what we consider a handsome jaw comes from the need to be able to chew hard things. The longer you have softer foods, the handsome jaws will be gone from the gene pool eventually. Many other things like that we consider, like people consider sexually attractive, will not be kept in the gene pool by sexual selection alone, because that would only happen if only those features were able to be passed on. But ugly people have children too, so that doesn't make a difference.
More.
So without the selection pressures from nature herself removing them, then people will become more ugly probably. As a result, there'll be some will be more adapted for the environment that we're in, which
Fat
does
slobs.
Yeah, but there might. I mean, one really strong selection pressure that's been in place since the Ice Age is for less fat. So although we're getting fatter, we're genetically becoming more and more less prone to being fat because we've been pushing these genes out of the gene pool. Because as foods become more and more abundant, especially since the Neolithic, the need for these genes has decreased. And also similarly on the same kind of selection pressure for genes associated with diabetes, they're being selected out. These were originally things that were advantageous because you want to put on fat and you want to like need lots of sugars because those are going to keep you alive, but now they'll kill you.
I have a question about this. Very important. Right? Yeah, immediately. So you said the Western hunter-gatherer lived through the Ice Age.
Everybody lived through the Ice Age.
They migrated south. Where the Western hunter-gatherer.
The Western hunter-gatherers descended from an Ice Age population from southeastern Europe and moved into Western and Northern Europe at the end of the Ice Age.
Okay. Are they fatter? Are they more fat?
They would have been, if they were alive now, they would be fat because they would be fat on average because they haven't undergone the selection pressure to remove the genes that encourage you to put on fat.
Because isn't there an island in the Pacific where these people are all fat?
There's similar reasons. They haven't had any selection pressure to not be fat. So they have very good selection pressure for them to want to eat sweet things like pineapples or whatever, but now when they got access to donuts and everything it's like it just ruins their bodies. So the terrible effects on people, some Polynesians, that it's just the Western diet will kill them. We still haven't adapted ourselves to this Western diet to survive it. As a result, many of us are still unhealthy, but it's quite unnatural and recent diet for us to have and for humans to have, and different people have differently adapted for it. But obviously, our original diet would be much more protein-based, eating, and very little sugar, except honey. But how frequently?
Was this your theory?
No, I think.
So, do you think that the descendants of those
if you look at people who have a strong Western hunter-gatherer influence, of which we know a few, which I will not name, of course, but they are more fat.
Classified.
I wouldn't be. It's generally Western hunter-gatherer ancestry has a kind of a north-south gradient in Europe. So the further south you go, the less it is. And one thing that has a north-south gradient in Europe is alcoholism. Quite a strong tendency. The further north you are, the much more prone to alcoholism. Even within Britain, there's a very strong gradient. The further north in Britain you are, the more genetically prone to alcoholism, with the highest rates of alcoholism in the northern part of Scotland.
There's less tolerance.
So, basically, the Western hunter-gatherers would have had no exposure to alcohol at all, whereas presumably the Anatolian farmers were drinking alcohol, and they have already started removing some genes associated with alcoholism from the gene pool because those people are dying of alcohol abuse or whatever. But so I guess that might explain it. I'm not sure about that. It might be the prevalence of alcoholism on a north-south gradient within Europe may be explained by genes associated with Western hunter-gatherers.
You would say alcohol is the reason they...
I didn't observe this thing that Northern Europeans are more fat than Southern Europeans, so I don't know if
Northern
that's...
Europeans, but I think people with phenotypic features associated with Western hunter-gatherers.
I haven't observed that myself.
Okay.
One thing I would say anecdotally, which is completely unscientific but similar to what you're saying, is that I have noticed that phenotypic features I associate with Western hunter-gatherers are quite more commonly found in homeless people. And I noticed, like, often see like homeless people on the street in Britain.
I believe
more likely to have prominent wide cheekbones.
Sorry.
the
prominent brow ridges, prominent cheekbones, short chin, upturned nose. These features are, and also they're likely to be alcoholics. So it might be that alcoholism is causing them to be homeless, and the genes are causing them to be prone to alcoholism.
Is this considered based or not?
It's at least very
so.
interesting.
This is pure speculation, by the way. I don't want anyone to think I'm proposing this as an actual scientific theory. I'm just observing that I think that it might be because something just that that being on the streets made their features more prominent or something. I don't know.
It's possible, of course.
Yeah.
Just one final question to round everything up. It's been great speaking to you thus far. Why has Britain gone insane? When I look at the news, or at least on my X feed, I see people getting arrested for just simple, funny tweets. It seems Britain has become the most repressive regime in Western Europe, almost more than Germany or Belgium. What happened?
I think it's like to do with there's a tension in Britain that's existed. There's always been a class tension. We're a very class-based society, perhaps more so than any other part of Europe. We've kept this old medieval class system in a way, although it's changed since medieval times. But it's now manifested now in a way where it's no longer an aristocracy in control, but it is a people who resent or dislike the general populace, and it's not for the old reasons of like medieval times or anything like that, but it's more like even Marxism itself was sort of invented for Britain. It was, Marx lived in England, and he's looking at, and a lot of early even radicals before Marx were, the French radicals of the French Revolution would come to England and look at the industrialization process and say why this was wrong. And like England was seen as the model of this is what, this is where capitalism's bad, this is where things are wrong, and the poor suffer here, and this is where the revolution will happen. But it never happened. And in fact, the general Englishman just does not care about being a communist revolution. The average English person is surprisingly based, compared to a lot of parts of Europe. And I think part of that is because of the class system as well. Like there's just a dislike of anything they're told. There's a mistrust of the state, which is not always present in other European nations. And there's a completely different idea of statehood, which is we've kept, while even most of the Germanic nations have moved like to a Napoleonic Roman style model of statehood, we've kept a more old Germanic one in a way. And it's there's very much a belief in liberty and like independence, and also a resentment towards politicians, which cuts across both sides. Like the left and the right both have that. So for different reasons, they'll say, "Oh, it's because I hate the government because they're all right wing," or "I hate the government because they're all left wing." But it's the same real, just mistrust of authority that's there, and it makes it impossible for people to really push things along quickly. And I think that what's happening now with left-wing government coming to power, they're really panicking, and they're wanting to move as fast as possible to a different type of state. Destroyed the House of Lords recently, the ancient traditions of hereditary traditions that go back to the Witan, to the Anglo-Saxon times, being destroyed now. They're all being destroyed now, and it's at the same time they're bringing in record numbers of immigrants, and they're really trying to accelerate to try and destroy England. And I say England rather than Britain because the same thing doesn't exist in the same way in Scotland. Scotland's generally much more left-wing than England is. They don't have that same rebelliousness, although they like to think of themselves as like a rebellious state sometimes. They're really not. They even the Scottish nationalists, their idea of rebellion is to be subservient to the EU. They have no plan to be independent at all. They just want a different master. The English people are the reason that America is a separate state, because they have this thing. It's there's a certain strain of English people, sort of somewhat among the middle classes and somewhat among the working classes, but it's not among all of them. But they want to do things their own way, and that is just absolutely hated by the political class, and I include the Conservatives and the Labour Party in that. And that's partly what's happening, and that's why you're seeing the response to the riots in the summer, which were completely legitimate. This disgusting event occurred where these children were murdered by a migrant, and they tried to pretend he was just he was a Welshman because he'd been living in Wales or some nonsense. This was and then also there had been recently 2 other types of riots just before. One with gypsy riots, and another with some Muslim riots, Muslim Pakistani riots, and both of the times those riots were completely unjustified, and they were given so much sympathy by the media and the politicians, and the political class was like trying to appease them. Then when the white people get very, very angry for a perfectly legitimate reason, they're told that their concerns are illegitimate and that they're racist and they need to shut up and that they're going to be arrested and the full force of the law will be used to control them. It's a completely different system. And of course, there's been a 2-tier system in place since before I was born in the 80s. Everyone talked about the one law for them, one law for us even then. But now more people in England suddenly realise it was made very clear, because all these events occurred within a 2-week period in the summer, and they got really, really angry, and quite justifiably so. And the government, instead of sort of thinking of ways to sort of dissipate this anger and sort of appease them, even by just giving them some, fake victories and like just letting the anger die down, instead push back hard on them, and even, putting old men in prison, and they're dying in prison. That one of them died in prison recently, who was arrested for the riots. It's not, the anger hasn't gone down, and the Keir Starmer's approval rating is now lower than that of the previous unelected Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, which was one of the lowest it's ever been. So there's never been a more hostile relationship between the British state and the people who are governed by it than now, as far, well, not in recent history anyway. So this explains some of their obsession with pushing these insane left-wing policies, because I think they're worried that if they don't push them really hard now, they might lose the chance, because they feel like they might slip from them or something.
The ruling class is fighting for its survival and radicalizing in doing so, and therefore
it's a very volatile situation at the moment, I think.
Interesting.
The question is, when will it be enough and something starts to happen? But I would suggest we maybe talk about this in a podcast we will maybe record somewhere in the future, because unfortunately there's so much to talk about. There's just too many things. Mm-hmm. And I think we also proved this. But for now, we have to end this and maybe do it next year, for instance. Thomas, thank you so much for being here, for talking with us, for sharing your ideas, for coming all the way to Amsterdam.
Yeah, it's lovely to be here.
The capital of like the liberal democracy and whatever, all the problems of the Western world. And thank you so much, really. And
thanks for having me. Of course. My pleasure to be here.
Thanks to all the people who are watching and listening in different countries in the Netherlands. Thank you so much for watching. Naar alle Nederlandse kijkers ook heel erg bedankt dat je hebt gekeken naar deze speciale aflevering van Koortsdroom Café. Laat in de comments weten wat je ervan vond, wat je ideeën zijn of je vragen hebt. En dan zien we jou heel graag bij de volgende aflevering. Tot dan!